Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. We've just finished up our first and 15 on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. We'd love to have you join us on our website or our app at some time at 9:45 one of these mornings. You can be a part of a little bit of live commentary with us. We have a fun conversation, and we get you ready for the day right there on that. But if you want to join us live here on the other platforms, happy to now welcome you on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Twitch and all those platforms we broadcast on each and every day. I think you've picked a really fun day to be with us. Obviously, some of our attention today is on the growing hype for some of the big games in the SEC this weekend and the interest that starts to grow related to that, in some cases in games involving future UGA opponents. So we'll do some of that here today. We've got some really good news to share as it relates to the legendary former coach and athletic director Vince Dooley. Georgia releasing some good news on him a moment ago, so we'll kind of get to that here at some point in time in the show. But two big topics I want to address. Kirby Smart said something interesting yesterday about how Georgia is perceived right now. Its status as an attempt to repeat as national champions, and it's going to actually lead me to ask some of y'all an interesting question. And listen, this is a question I do believe that has a right answer, and so we'll get to that here coming up in a moment. But before that, as Georgia gets ready for the games that matter the most this season, I think at the exact right time, you've got a handful of very young players, true freshmen, who are maybe starting to come into their own, or in some cases kind of already been in their own. And these players are going to be really important for Georgia down the stretch run of the season. Always fun to think about young players who show out, and Dawg's got a few examples of that, including one big example that really seemed to flex there on Saturday. So what do you say we cover all of that as we get things going? So happy to have you with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
If you watch or listen to the show on a regular basis, there's something you've heard me say before. You know, we are obviously Georgia football fans, but I'm also just kind of a sports fan in general. I like following sports, and for my entire life, this sort of seemed like it's always been true, and probably you noticed the same thing. There is some excitement in sports when it comes to rookies. I'm a Braves fan. You've got a couple of Braves right now who are kind of battling it out to be Rookie of the Year. You know, Michael Harris, Spencer Strider, guys like that. And throughout the years, the Braves have had these like sort of rookie phenoms that sort of emerge. And there's always something really exciting about a rookie. You know, in the NFL season, you're watching that. Even if it's not your team, there's this curiosity that sort of emerges sometimes of, well, who's going to be Rookie of the Year? Who's the best rookie? I grew up collecting like football cards and baseball cards and things like that. And so we always sort of gravitate towards the rookies in that market. And there's just something about young players stepping on the scene and playing really well that just kind of seems to transcend whatever sport, whatever year. We're always just sort of interested in young stars in sports. I don't really quite know why we're so attracted to that. I guess it's probably just anything new seems interesting. And I would say that college football is no different on that. You know, Georgia fans love their great players, but there is something especially interesting when one of those great players is a young guy. When a guy who we kind of followed as a recruit, when he had a big recruiting label next to him, oftentimes five-star type guys, when those guys step on the field and they contribute right away, there's just something really cool about that. And I would say this also kind of goes beyond just fan reaction. You know, we get energized by that, but I think that new blood also has the potential to energize a team too. I think it makes practices more spirited. You take a roster that's already talented and you put some other guys talented in there as well, and all of a sudden there's a competition for playing time. There's a battle during practice reps, and all of a sudden it's not just spice added to the fan enjoyment of this, but that's a pretty spicy mixture for the team as it gets ready for games there too. Anytime you add more talent, new talent, fresh talent, hungry talent into an already talented roster, I think there's something really good about that too. So this, I believe, is the perfect time to talk about this. You know what the state of play is for Georgia right now. SEC game against Vanderbilt on Saturday. Georgia is a huge favorite. Now, Georgia hasn't always played great thus far this season when it has been a huge favorite, but the expectation is that Georgia wins easy on Saturday. And then after that, it's a rest week, and then it is a doozy. It is Florida and Tennessee and Kentucky and Mississippi State in some order there. And you're talking about ranked opponents, tough road games, hated rivals. you're talking about what really is the stretch drive of the regular season coming up for Georgia. And it goes without saying that you want to be at your best when you play everything that happens beyond this. We kind of knew that there would be a portion of this Georgia schedule that was going to feel a little bit lackluster, a little bit bleh or mah, or whatever the kind of noise you want to make related to that. Well, on Saturday after the Vanderbilt, that stuff is over, and everything after that is serious business all the way through January. And what we hope is a go for 2 and 22 here, a repeat national championship for Georgia. So we would say that the recipe for Georgia being at its best for all those games that come up is to also get some of your new blood involved, the excitement that comes from rookie players or the college football version of that, former elite recruits as freshmen. That's a big part of what Georgia needs to be as it gets to its very best for the phase of the schedule that comes up after Saturday. And it just so happens, as I was kind of looking at things here this morning, thinking about how Georgia gets ready for what's on its way, that my, oh my, doesn't it seem like at just exactly the right time, Georgia's got a handful of freshmen who really look poised to do some big things in the second half of the regular season. And kind of, if you think about the 15-game full schedule, the final sort of 2/3 of the schedule almost that could still play its way out for UGA. And I want to kind of run through these for a minute. Let me start with a guy here that's been well documented. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because at this point in time we've already said it. Malachi Stark is one of the names on this list. Malachi Stark is already one of the best players on this team. Malachi Stark is already one of the most important parts of this team. And when you think about big plays later on this season, Malachi Stark's, DNA is going to be all over that football late in this year when it really matters the most for Georgia. At this point in time, we've sort of chronicled the Stark story. He obviously had the highlight interception against Oregon, has been a really pivotal figure for Georgia a lot since then. But if you're going to make the list of impactful freshman guys breaking through at the exact right time, let's at least put Starks on the list because he clearly belongs there. But let's don't spend a ton of time on that because that's a guy at this point in time we've all remarked on, we've all marveled on. He is now an established part of this Georgia story, one of the most important players in this Georgia secondary. Malachi Starks, you already know that. On Saturday, though, we found out about another guy, other side of the ball here for a moment, who is maybe not quite as quick to emerge. At one point in time during the summer, I think I would have probably told you, gosh, why aren't we hearing more about this guy? Why aren't we hearing the kind of buzz that sometimes you hear and you were kind of left to wonder, is this case, is no news the opposite of good news? Is it bad news that we're not hearing more buzz, more chatter? And well, lo and behold, on Saturday, you finally got a chance to see him in an extended stretch with your own eyes, and you were left to conclude, oh, maybe this running back, Branson Robinson, really is as good as we thought he might be coming out of high school. Obviously, the physique, the build, the focus, just everything about him obviously kind of has the look of being a future great player. And on Saturday, when he came within an eyelash of getting 100 yards rushing, you were left to conclude, no, you know what? Maybe when it matters most, when Georgia needs to lean on its running game, Saturday it did very successfully. When it matters most, maybe Branson Robinson, a recruit who was beloved, maybe Robinson is now ready to be put on the list of players who you are excited about in their first year, who could be big contributors as Georgia moves through its most important games of the upcoming season. Going back to Monday here for a moment, Kirby Smart, as you might imagine, coming off the game against Auburn, was asked a lot about Branson Robinson, including what it was that led him to get the moment that he got on Saturday, becoming a pretty important cog in this Georgia rushing attack at a time in which Georgia needed somebody to step up there at that position. This is what Kirby said about Robinson going back to Monday.
He was able to do it because of opportunity, and he was able to do it because of a really good game plan in the run game and our offensive line moving their defensive line. But he was given the opportunity to do it, and he seized that opportunity. He created that opportunity for himself through his work habits, how hard he's worked since arriving. But it's not like he hadn't been talented the whole time he's here. He's earned the opportunity through the work he's done, and you gain confidence through what you do in practice. And I think he continues to grow, have attention to detail in terms of pickups on checks and protection and protecting the ball and making good run reads, and he's done a lot of those things, and we certainly felt strongly enough about him and the job he's done in practice to get him some in-game carries.
I love to hear that from Kirby Smart. That level of praise for Robinson kind of matters to me, and it's kind of funny. If you observe our audience, they pretty much treat him as if he is, they call him, Branson Chubb. I mean, because he sort of has the look that Nick Chubb sort of had, that people just sort of treat him like Nick Chubb. And, Chubb's one of the most popular players of Georgia all time, and I mean that literally full stop. One of the most popular Bulldogs ever. And in some respects, Robinson has kind of inherited some of that Nick Chubb popularity, and people have kind of given him their love for Chubb because they sort of think he's kind of like the next in line of a Nick Chubb-style running back at Georgia. It's just really interesting how unanimous that point of view seems to be. Well, as you might imagine, Kirby Smart doesn't love the comparison to Nick Chubb or really any other running back. This is Smart on that topic, going back to Monday, too.
No, not really, because I don't think it's fair. Like, I'll let you guys do all the comparing. I'm happy with who Branson is. Like, Branson's his own person. I think everybody tries to give somebody a style of running back, but I don't know that you've got a body of work large enough to know. We probably do because we get to see him each and every day, but I don't think giving him comparisons is fair to him or the others, and I think he's going to be a really good football player. He has great burst and acceleration, and he has great toughness.
So listen, sports fans speak in the language of comparisons. We're always looking for the next Jordan in basketball or the next Tom Brady as a quarterback or something like that. Sports fans just speak in the language of comparisons. That's the way that sports fans talk, and that's not disrespectful to do it that way. That's just kind of the way which we all kind of approach sports. But Smart is right that if you want to fully give Robinson the credit that he deserves, we should all be looking for the things that make Branson, not the things that make Branson like Chubb, but the thing that make Branson Robinson his own archetype and the kind of player that maybe one day future running backs at Georgia might be compared to. I think that Smart's actually on to something when he says that, but either way, when you think about Georgia down the stretch, needing all hands on deck, as many contributions as it can get, a guy like Branson Robinson, especially with kind of the unknown status of Kendall Milton right now, who's apparently not practicing, and all the stuff related to that. Boy, leaning on Branson Robinson is incredibly important, and it seems like Robinson may be coming to his own at just the right time to be able to do that. Now, I'm going to come back to the offensive side here in a moment, but let me go over the defensive side now to get a couple of names. So we're talking about Malachi Stark, freshman breaking out at just the right time for Georgia. He's kind of been on the scene now for a while. Branson Robinson, freshman breaking out at just the right time. I want to see more of what I saw Saturday against Auburn. How about a couple of other guys that seem to be doing a lot of good things right now? Kirby was asked, this was Monday too, Kirby was asked about, what's going on third down defensively. For a long time, Georgia's kind of given the third down defense to be a little bit of a showcase for some of its freshman stars, its upcoming guys. Think about Trayvon Walker in 2019, guys like that. Had a chance to do some really good things for Georgia on third down. Turn it loose and get after the quarterback or get after whatever. Well, a couple of the guys who are sort of doing some of that right now are Mikael Williams, who I would say thus far has been as advertised. Bear Alexander. With Jalen Carter injured, you need somebody to step up there along your defensive line. And Bear Alexander, I would say, has the look, my eyes tell me, of potentially a future star. So when you're making a list of freshmen who also seem to be coming to their own at the right time, breaking out at just the right time, how about adding Mikael Williams to that list, Bear Alexander to that list? Kirby this week talked about them along with Xavier Sori, who's admittedly not a freshman, but talking about the role that these freshman guys are playing on that third down defense in particular, and you hear some of the excitement and the buzz gets growing around Mikael, former elite recruit, Bear, former elite recruit, and guys who are paying off on that recruiting hype early on in their Georgia career. This is Kirby from earlier this week.
They've earned the right to be out there. They're extremely good athletes. They have quickness, explosive. Might not have the strength in terms of the core weight room. I mean, Bear's coming off of shoulder surgery. Michael's a freshman that went through spring, and then Sori is a guy that came in and had not played a lot of football in high school because of injuries. So they all three have really good traits. I think one of the best things we do here at Georgia is take a freshman and say, what does he do really well? How do we utilize that in year one? And you go back to the year that we had N'Kobe on third down, Trevon was on third down, Tyreek Stevenson was on third down. We had these players that were playing as freshmen on third down because they could go out and execute at a premium. Some of those guys that you're talking about are playing out of necessity. We had other guys that might be in front of them, whether it be Smile or Jalen, that get dinged up. Those guys got to get ready to go play. So been pleased with what they've done, but we got to execute a little better with each one of them included.
So if you're keeping score at home here, we're up to 4 names. Malachi Stark, you've known that for a while. Branson Robinson, you learned that on Saturday. Mikael Williams, Bear Alexander, you've also seen enough to put them on this list there too. Let me give you one more name to consider, and Kirby Smart talked about him last night. I don't have time to play the audio clip for you on this, but Smart did mention this. Oscar Delp was in the game some for you on Saturday. You did do that 3 tight end set with him a little bit on Saturday. And Georgia right now is in the midst of trying to figure out its offensive identity and figure out who the dependable playmakers in this offense are going to be. I think I've seen enough from Delp to make me think that I want to see more of him. And if that means playing in a 3 tight end set more, I think I want Georgia to do that. I do, because you want Darnell Washington in the field. You have to have Brock Bowers in the field. But given the choice of, who else you can put out there, I think I want to see more of Delp here. I think when it comes to dependable playmakers in this team, I think what you've seen from Delp at times, touchdown against South Carolina, for instance, I think that kind of gives you an idea that he might make a really big catch or two for you before the end of the season. So playing in October in a game against a rival like Auburn could be foreshadowing of what's to come. So this is a little bit of a hunch for me on the Delp part of this, but I'm going to add him to that list there as well. And you can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and see what Kirby said about Oscar last night. So here's my 5. 5 freshman phenoms getting ready to break out for Georgia and be a big part of the stretch run. Malachi Starks, Mikael Williams, Bear Alexander on defense, at least those 3. Offensively, it's Branson Robinson. I think it's Oscar Delp, and who knows who else gets added to that list. But at exactly the right time, I think that Georgia's starting to get some really good play from some of its youngest, most hyped recruits, but all of a sudden now you're starting to see what some of that hype was actually all about. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Breda Pest Management, and we are all about hashtag Go for 2 in 22 as Georgia makes a big push towards a second national championship and a second consecutive national championship this season. And, of course, freshman phenoms being a big part of all of that. And, of course, we're glad to have you as a big part of what we're doing here today, whether it's on video starting at 9:45, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts, Apple, Spotify, all the podcast platforms. Just really happy to have you with us as a part of what we're doing today. And a big, big thanks to our sponsors who make this possible, including for today, the entire show brought to you by our friends at Breda Pest Management. Now, listen, when it comes to taking care of business in the world of pest control and termites and things like that, Breda Pest Management, they're not freshmen, they're not rookies. They've been doing this for a long time, going back to the 1970s, in fact. And that is why they have been around long enough to establish some real credentials. Did you know that they're the official pest control provider of UGA athletics? And so when you look down there on that field at Sanford Stadium, you should know the entire facility is protected by Breda Pest Management. And you should also think about this. On a surface the size of the football field at Sanford Stadium, there's room for like millions and millions of termites. It's amazing how many can fit in just kind of a small space, confined space, because termites themselves are really small. But they're also killers for your home, too. They do incredible damage. You already know that. And you also may know this there, too. If you don't, you should take advantage of this right now. Because of the fact that Breda Pest Management as an organization has the strength that it has, being the official pest control provider of UGA athletics, being in business for such a long time, having, more than 100 employees all across the Atlanta area in the state of Georgia, that resource level, that level of strength, they want to leverage that for your benefit. And here's how they're going to do that. They're able to provide you the great pest control service they give to UGA as the official pest control provider of UGA athletics. They're able to protect your home from termites. They're able to do all the stuff that your current company's doing, but they probably will be able to do it for less. In fact, when you make that switch to our friends at Breda Pest Management, they're going to put more money in your pocket instantly just for making that decision. So lean on their strength, leverage their resources to your benefit, get great coverage for less money than you're currently paying with whatever fly-by-night company you might be having to use now. Use our friends at Breda Pest Management, make the switch, and put more money in your pocket today just for doing that. Here's the website to go to. It's BredaPest.com. That's BredaPest.com. B-R-E-D-A, BredaPest.com. We love Matt Brady and the entire team over there at Breda Pest Management, and we heartily recommend them making the switch to them to take advantage of the big savings you can get for doing just that. All right, we're going to talk to Mike Griffith here in a moment. We're going to get some thoughts from him on the preparations for Georgia and its game against Vanderbilt on Saturday, and then what comes after that here for UGA as well. We'll do all of that. Before that, though, we'll go around the doghouse. And Kirby Smart was kind of asked an interesting question yesterday. In fact, it was our buddy Mike Griffith who asked it about being, technically, Ohio State is the consensus national championship favorite right now. If you look across the internet, Ohio State is the listed favorite almost almost all the books in terms of the current national championship favorite. They kind of just recently moved up to that spot. But Georgia has been a favorite to win the national championship. They are ranked number 1 in the AP poll right now. And so Kirby was asked by Mike yesterday about, kind of a status of a national championship favorite. One betting house, I guess, in particular, that has listed Georgia as the favorite. This kind of led to kind of an interesting exchange with Mike and Kirby. Take a listen to this from yesterday.
Kirby, I know that you have absolutely no interest in being a favorite, but if somebody would have told you that Georgia is the national championship favorite at the midway point of the season after losing what you lost to Portland in the NFL, would you believe that would have been possible?
I wouldn't have cared. Because I don't trust the source, so I really don't care.
Circa. It's the circus sport.
Right. I don't even know what that is.
I think it'd be funny if Kirby did know what that is, and I think it'd be funny if he kind of broke down some big-time betting analysis there for you. So you're probably not that surprised to hear Kirby Smart not be familiar with the Nevada betting house Circa or anything else, or kind of in relationship to Georgia's national championship odds. You're probably not that surprised by that. But obviously around here we talk a lot about hashtag go for 2 and 22, and maybe you're interested in betting on Georgia win the national championship. Maybe you're not. Maybe you believe it is a good bet. Maybe you don't. But let me actually ask you a different question instead. Kirby Smart was asked about Georgia being the favorite, essentially betting on Georgia to win the title. Let me ask you this. Would you bet on Georgia not to win the national championship? Because that's, to me, is one of the interesting things you can do sometimes. Not every betting house does this. There are some that do, though. I'm going to show you an example here on the screen. What's called a yes-no bet. Not every betting house has this. Some of them do. Not only can you bet on Georgia to win the national championship, if you really feel strongly, you can bet on Georgia not to win the national championship. So obviously, if you're thinking about Georgia winning it, then you're kind of comparing them to the field. But if you think about Georgia not winning it, all you're thinking about then is, does this team has what it takes? Is this team made of what it needs to be made of to win the national championship? And if you're watching a video, you see this. The no bet right now is minus 294. What that basically means is you'd have to bet almost $300, and if Georgia does win the national championship, you'll win $100 back. So you could get 30% return on your money in just a few months' time. There are very few investments that would ever provide that. If you really do feel confident that Georgia is not going to win the national championship. So I'll ask you that question again. Should you feel confident that Georgia is not going to win the national championship, whether you be a Georgia fan or anybody else? I think the only wise appraisal of the situation is no, you shouldn't feel confident in that. Who knows if they will or won't, but we haven't seen anything through one half of the regular season to say that they're definitely not going to. Georgia, in the status that it currently finds itself in, is sort of exactly where you would expect them to be, because in the college football playoff era, which dates back to 2014, we only have 2 examples of national champions in the playoff era that didn't return to the playoff the following year. And in the case of LSU in 2019, a lot of that was just sort of based on losing kind of a generational quarterback. That's the explanation there. So for the most part, Georgia right now is exactly where you would expect a reigning national champion to be, right there in the mix this upcoming, in this current season there too. And you say, well, they haven't been perfect. Sure, they haven't been perfect, but take a look at the last team to repeat as national champions. Think about Alabama in 2011 and 2012 over the course of that 2-year span. Bama lost a game to LSU, which didn't score an offensive touchdown. Bama had a bad game defensively against Texas A&M, where Johnny Manziel ran wild. Go back and look at the 2012 season for Bama. They could stop Georgia Southern one day in Tuscaloosa, leading to one of Nick Saban's funniest and most famous rants. Even Bama in 2011 and 2012, the last team to repeat as national champions, they weren't perfect over that 2-year stretch either. Perfection's not the standard. Excellence is the standard. And we saw a year ago that Georgia was able to call upon excellence when it really needed to. There's no guarantee that happens again this upcoming year. But the point here is, when you consider Georgia's status halfway through the regular season, is there also isn't a guarantee that they won't. Georgia right now is sort of exactly where most reigning national champions in the playoff era have been. Right there in the mix to at least be back in that spot again, with a chance to maybe even go for 2 and 22 again there as well. That is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And the guy that asked that question to Kirby Smart yesterday, we'll talk to right now. We'll call it a Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update, and welcome in Mike Griffith to the program here today.
From From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And we will say hello to Mike Griffith here, Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update. Georgia getting ready for Vanderbilt on Saturday, getting a little bit of rest after that, and getting ready for a big run through the second half of the regular season, what we think of as kind of the middle third of a 15-game schedule coming up after that. And, Mike, I guess we'll begin with where you were yesterday, asking Kirby Smart about Georgia's national championship odds. I'll turn the table here a little bit. Do you think Georgia, kind of where it is right now, somewhere in that, 2.5, 3 to 1 area, do you think Georgia's a good bet for the national championship right now?
I'd take the field over Georgia. I would say it's less likely they'll win it than it's likely, just because there's only been one team in 25 years that's repeated. Those are long odds, and Georgia hasn't really been tested. I don't see another team out there that I would bet on. In fact, I'd take the field over any team just because of the odds. But Georgia looks like a really good bet to make the college football playoff. But, there's a lot of football to be played, and again, unless you think Auburn's that good that they could shut out the number one team in the country in their home stadium for a quarter, I don't think that. Or that Missouri's that good that they could be beating the best team in the nation by 10 points entering the fourth quarter, I don't think that. So I think Georgia's got the upside to win the national championship. But if you're saying would I take Georgia or the 130 other teams, I think the odds are probably best that the other 130 teams would produce the champ.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I think the field is the right pick against any team for the most part. But you're also touching on something else that I think is really important here too, which is that obviously on my show, we're very fixated on what's happening with Georgia, and our audience, in some respects, all they really have time to do on a college football Saturday is watch Georgia. They don't have time to watch as much college football as I kind of like to watch because this is my job. So I watch a ton of college football. And when you're only kind of watching one team with regularity, I think you have a tendency sometimes maybe overrate a team's strengths, but I think you also have a tendency at times to overrate a team's weaknesses too, and you don't realize that everybody's got weaknesses. Because if it's not Georgia who wins the national championship, well, maybe it's Alabama. Honestly, Alabama didn't look very good on Saturday. And you say, well, what about Ohio State? Ohio State just played its first road game this past Saturday. They played 5 straight home games to begin the season. I don't think we know anything about Ohio State as of yet, and then you sort of get to Clemson and teams like that really are much larger unknowns. So no doubt we could point out some obvious blemishes for UGA, areas in which improvement is clearly needed. But if you really watch the other so-called contenders very closely, you could have the same conversation around them, or you very likely will be having more of those conversations as tougher tests come for some of those teams. I think it's important to keep that perspective in mind.
Yeah, especially Ohio State. Because they played the close game with Notre Dame, and then Notre Dame didn't turn out to be what we thought. C.J. Stroud's probably the best quarterback in the nation, but who have they played, right? We won't really know until they play Penn State, until they play Michigan. Beating Michigan State on the road this year, that doesn't seal it for me. This is not a good version of Michigan State football. So, to your point, who has been? Alabama's been tested, and it hasn't always looked good. They had to come from behind to beat Texas. My goodness, if we're going to pick at Georgia for being 10 points down to a bad Missouri team, we've got to note that Alabama had to come from behind against a mediocre Texas team and has a quarterback injury issue now. We don't even know if Bryce Young's going to play Saturday. And if he does play, here's the thing about injuries. We get this video game mentality. And if he's back from the injury, okay, well, you're never really back. Once you've, busted up your shoulder, really, hell, you saw it with J.T. Daniels last year. I don't think he was back really till November, right? And that's probably what kept him out of the lineup. But, when guys get hurt and come back, it's not like hitting the reset button on the video game and you're back at 100. I know that from cracking my ribs 2 summers ago. I was back and able to work 3 days later and able to jog a month and a half later, but I was still feeling that 6-7 months later, right? And so you wonder what version of Bryce Young's coming out. I wonder about Jalen Carter. An even bigger picture, B.A. Here's a kid whose family, from a pop cut, he's looking at, $20-30 million. He's had a foot, he's had an ankle, he's had a knee. Do you risk your $25-30 million and come back and play? And if you do come back and play, is it somewhere in the back of your mind that someone's going to take your knee again? So injuries are it just makes you wonder. What version of Jalen Carter comes back? What version of Bryce Young comes back? How good is Ohio State? They haven't been tested. The season's still in front of us.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you mentioned the injury part of this, and then we'll kind of use this as a way to kind of transition to the Vanderbilt game for a moment. This is why I think that being a sort of 30-plus point favorite week after week after week matters. This is why you work so hard to build the kind of team that can play laughable games more often than not. Now, Georgia hasn't always succeeded in that role this season. We'll certainly grant that. But this is why that status matters. This is because I can't really think of an instance in which I saw Kirby Smart ever rush a player back from injury. Georgia just doesn't have to do that. They gave A.D. Mitchell a shot last week. He clearly wasn't ready, and he only played a couple handful of snaps. I don't think there's any chance they come out here and try that again with him on Saturday because they don't have to. In the case of Jalen Carter, they don't have to do that either. They don't have to certainly play him against Vanderbilt. If they wanted not to play him against Florida, they don't have to do that. Now, you say, well, maybe Carter's got a decision in the future. I won't really, go down that road one way or another. But the point is that Georgia is not going to rush anybody to come back because it has built the kind of program in which you don't really need to do that. And the point that I totally agree with you on is that I don't think we fully process what a A-level player playing at 80% of his capabilities is really like. That's not the same thing as the sort of A-level starter. I would certainly grant you on that. But this is why Georgia has built the program up to the level that it is that you don't have to rush an A.D. Mitchell. You don't have to rush Jalen Carter. You clearly miss them when they're not out there. Georgia misses a lot of guys who are not out there. But you don't have to be panicked about their status because hopefully you've got the kind of program depth where you can at least absorb it when they're not there.
Yeah, championship depth is everything. I've said it once, I'll say it again. The most impressive thing about Georgia's team last year is they lost their best offensive player and their best defensive player, and they plugged in fifth-year seniors and didn't miss a beat. I mean, J.T. Daniels leads SEC Media Days as a Heisman Trophy favorite. He goes down, you plug in a fifth-year senior in Stetson, boop, keep winning. Adam Anderson leads the team in sacks. Looks like one of the most impressive outside linebackers we've seen in many years. He gets dismissed from the program, and bloop, you plug in fifth-year senior Robert Beal, right? And that was what was so incredible about last year's team was they were so deep and so prepared, and that defense was just, smothering. I mean, you talk about LSU having a legacy player. Georgia had a legacy defense. This year it doesn't, right? We really don't. We know Missouri and Kent State can score over 20 points on that. I mean, that's not last year's defense out there, but we didn't expect it to be, right? Now I'll say this too: there's probably 3 or 4 teams in the SEC that would be undefeated with Georgia's schedule that they've played so far, especially catching Oregon in their opener before Dan Lanning knew everybody's first name. Conversely, had Georgia played somebody else's, maybe you put Georgia with Alabama's schedule, do they lose one of those games? Maybe. Maybe they get beat by A&M. Maybe they get beat. But the bottom line is that this year Georgia got dealt a good schedule. It's about time. No need to apologize because Georgia's been screwed over with the schedule for many years. So this year they got a good schedule. They're taking advantage of it. They're undefeated. They're number one. They play the worst team in Power 5 ranks, worst defense in Power 5 ranks, at least pass defense, provided that Vanderbilt actually shows up this time. And then you get a bye week. And then you basically have a 4-game season, and then you try to keep everybody from getting in fist fights and unneeded injuries against Georgia Tech in the last game. So I don't think things could be much better considering the circumstances, Brandon.
Yeah, let's move on to the Vanderbilt game here. To me, I don't put a lot in Vanderbilt whatsoever one way or another. I'm excited about being back between the hedges, of course, but the game itself doesn't carry a lot of interest and weight for me. What do you want to see against Vanderbilt on Saturday if you're Georgia?
Stetson Bennett get accurate and hope that his shoulder's not hurt, which I think it might be. I think that some of the missed throws, I mean, he's not the most accurate guy in the world, but he usually hits the guy. But last week he's off, and I think it's the shoulder and the fact that Kirby said it bothered him. Kirby's words, not mine, that, against Missouri he got dinged up and said it bothered him. Now, Kirby also said it didn't bother him enough for him to miss practices, which means he's able to throw and it's a pain tolerance thing. But once again, like you said, how calibrated are these athletes? Like Bryce Young comes back from a shoulder. Part of what made Bryce Young special was he was incredibly accurate. When he had receivers out there, he could put it on a dime. Is he going to be able to do that if his shoulder's not 100? It's like a great basketball player playing with an ankle. Maybe they don't elevate quite the same. Maybe the jump shot's a little bit off. The amount of coordination for these quarterbacks, I mean, it's got to be the most difficult position to play in any sport, Brandon. It just has to be able to run and think three-dimensionally and and throw a ball and lead a receiver based on judging the speed, pass timing, and experience. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult spot, and you don't have to be very off to look a lot off. And Stetson missed some open receivers. So playing the worst pass defense in the country, Power 5, is I guess Ohio's worst at 131, Vanderbilt's 130. I hope that Stetson gets dialed in with his receivers. I mean, it's been 3 games without a touchdown pass. That's a flashing light. That's not good. I mean, Brock Bowers only has 2 touchdown receptions. That's not good. Darnell Washington only caught 2 passes the last game. Brock caught 2 out of 6 targets. I mean, that is not good. Your run game got going, but you were playing Auburn. I mean, everybody pounds them in the second half. So I want to see the pass game. I want to see Stetson get dialed in, and some of those receivers help Stetson out, win more of those one-on-ones on the perimeters. Hopefully Ladd McConkey is 100%. The guy was playing with a foot injury, less than 100 all year. A.D. Mitchell, Kirby says it's a thumb now, Brandon. I don't know what to believe. Is it a thumb? Is it his ankle and he just wasn't ready? Who knows? It'd be great to see him out there. It'd be great to see Brock Bowers with a 100-yard game and a touchdown catch, and maybe throw a ball to Darnell Washington in the red zone. I mean, I don't think you can cover him. So there's a lot I want to see, but most of it's in the pass game.
We'll get more of your questions coming up with Mike Griffith here in a moment. Let me remind folks, this is our Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update here right now. And, of course, we're always happy to have Georgia Farm Bureau on our program each and every week because, listen, the folks at Georgia Farm Bureau can do some great stuff for you. They live and they work and they do life. They're participating in communities just like yours all across the great state of Georgia. That means they want to serve people just like you each and every day. And they want to do that when it comes to insurance products. They understand that when it comes to your home, that's not just your most important investment. It's kind of the source of a lot of your best memories. It's where you're kind of building your life, and protecting that really matters. So getting your home insurance through Georgia Farm Bureau is a great choice. Same thing when it comes to auto insurance, too. A lot of you use that automobile to get you working each and every day. It's how you provide for your family. And the folks at Georgia Farm Bureau are busy providing for their families as well. They understand that's your story, too. And so they want to give you the great coverage you need to take care of that vehicle that's so important for all the things you have going on in your life. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau gets. They're a part of communities just like yours. We say Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. And you can find out more about that at gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com. You can check that out today. So, Mike, I'll finish with this. You know, as I said before, I don't take a lot from this Vanderbilt game one way or another. It's more of a box to be checked as opposed to, I guess, a data point to consider for me. But, boy, you think about post-bye week. Hated rival Florida. Big step up in competition with ranked teams like, Tennessee, Mississippi State, whatever Kentucky is by the time you get to that game. Things are about to get a good bit more interesting for UGA, and getting ready for what is coming next, I think, is kind of a fun thing for Georgia fans to consider, because for as sleepy as, some of these games have been, September turning to October, as the schedule gets ready for November, that feeling is going to quickly change for UGA.
There's no doubt. I always say be careful what you wish for. I mean, thank goodness that was Missouri and not Mississippi State you were playing at a couple of weeks ago, and thank goodness it was Kent State and not Tennessee that you had that sort of effort in. But then you wonder, if it's Tennessee or if it's Mississippi State, do you get a different version of Georgia? Do you get a more dialed-in version? I mean, human nature is what it is. And, part of what's made Alabama football so great under Nick Saban is they've won all the games they're supposed to. And you mentioned the Georgia Southern game. That was a bit of an anomaly. They won the game, but they struggled, and we went, oh, my gosh, that's not supposed to happen, because it usually doesn't. They don't have the close games with Kent States and Missouris typically. I don't know what to make of A&M yet. I know they play pretty good run defense and have a good running back, and I guess we saw how mortal Alabama can be with a backup quarterback. But there's a lot on the table as far as what's coming up. I mean, I don't know how good Tennessee is. If Bryce Young comes back and it's vintage Bryce Young, I think Alabama probably wins by 2 touchdowns. But if it's not Bryce Young, or if it's a different version of Bryce Young, I don't know what happens up there at Tennessee. They've got a lot of older, more experienced guys they're riding a wave. I mean, and all that matters is how good they think they are, and if they play that way. So could Tennessee be the SEC champion? Who knows? I don't think so. But what if they beat Alabama by 2 touchdowns? What if and what if Stetson's shoulder is worse than we know? I mean, there's a lot of what ifs. And but to your point, I think I think they've got it covered. I still think they got depth at these positions. Okay, if Jalen Carter doesn't play, I don't think there's another Jalen Carter. But Nazir Stackhouse and Zion Logue and Bear Alexander's playing more snaps. I mean, these guys are good, and the linebackers, once Smile London gets back, and the way Malachi Stark has played as a freshman, I would have never seen this incredible performance. I mean, Malachi's been an unbelievable story. Kamari Lassiter, so many of these young guys. That's what's exciting, to your point, is Georgia's depth and the way Kirby's recruited and developed. You feel like they've got it covered. We don't need to talk about quarterback situations, but you've got people that have been in the program a long time, and the running backs, right? I mean, Kendall Milton went down, and we saw Dejon Edwards do well in his expanded role, and Robinson had some nice carries, albeit against Auburn, but still, to your point, it's after Vanderbilt, it's after the bye week, and then you play your designated home game down in Jackson. Is that the last time that's going to happen? We don't know what's going to happen with the series. Some news on that could be coming out in the next couple weeks as far as the future of the Jacksonville game or the Georgia-Florida rivalry. Does Atlanta find their way into a 3 or 4 city rotation? If we go to a 9-game schedule, there's all sorts of things on the table, and that's why it's so great, to listen to you on DawgNation Daily every day, because you keep us up to date on that and keep us thinking, Brandon. I appreciate that.
Well, Mike, I appreciate that there as well. Thank you for the kind words. And I appreciate you being here as part of our Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update there as well. And, Mike, really quickly before we let you go, I haven't really mentioned this yet. I want to make sure we do. Georgia reporting officially something that kind of been out in the, last couple of days, is the legendary former coach and athletic director Vince Dooley has been released from the hospital. It was obviously away from the game on Saturday, not at his typical home there at the UGA bookstore, but he's feeling better again, been released from the hospital. I know you'll join me in celebrating that as the great news that it is, and frankly, the answer of prayers from so many. Happy to hear Coach Dooley feeling better, and I'm sure you would join me in saying that.
Absolutely, and he'll be at the bookstore on Saturday, he said. So we're ready to go.
I'm telling you, man, he's a machine. I love that, and he's so great with people there, so that's awesome. Mike, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, B.A.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I tell you, the thing about Coach Dooley that I just love, and I had a chance to experience this a couple times over the course of the last couple of years, really one of the thrills of my life, because you got to understand something. Like I was a kid in the 80s, not quite Herschel Walker 80s, but like sort of post-Herschel 80s, and like Vince Dooley is this towering figure in my life. So I get a chance to, I don't want to say necessarily know him a little bit, but I've certainly talked to him plenty of times. And the way in which he makes you feel like you're a part of his orbit, I had a chance to be at his home one time, and he kind of showed me some. Obviously, he's got this like legendary collection of memorabilia from his life, and had a chance to be a part of a ceremony that he was part of a couple of years ago, and that was a great experience. Like, he's very good at being Vince Dooley. He's very good at telling the Coach Dooley stories, doing all that kind of stuff. So, Mike mentions the UGA bookstore where he has been at so many of these Saturdays, and I have great friends opposite the UGA bookstore. They're a great partner of ours, and I know how much they love having Coach Dooley there, signing his books, but also just kind of talking to Georgia fans, telling those stories. Like, this is a cherished figure in this program's history, not just because he won games, but because he's a guy that understands so much of that history and so much of that appreciation. So love Coach Dooley. Happy to know that he's feeling better, and happy to know that Georgia fans, according to Mike, said going to get a chance to interact with him again here at the UGA bookstore, maybe as soon as this Saturday. So that's really, really good stuff to be able to see. Would you mind if we turn that music down just a tiny little bit as we get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean? I heard from a dog fan yesterday who said, "BA, I'm going to be right there with you on the cruise." Let me see if I can just quickly do this and kind of give correct credit here to who had mentioned this to me yesterday. I was so happy to see that another dog fan has kind of signed up to be a part of this with us. I'll never do this quickly enough to be able to do it quickly and give the credit that it deserves. Yeah, here we go. It's Mitt. Mitt checking in to say that he's going to be with us here coming up on the DawgNation cruise, which I'm so happy for, saying, hey, I've been hearing you talk about it. I want to be a part of it, and now I'm going to be a part of that coming up in April. And you have a chance to do the same thing that so many of the Georgia fans have done. I talked to some of our people yesterday. I said, hey, how are we doing on these stateroom bookings for Independence of the Season April? And they were saying, BA, you wouldn't believe how many we've already booked. And they were, citing some big number. And by the time we get to blah, blah month, we're going to be at blah, blah, blah. And it's just going to be the biggest event we've probably ever done here at DawgNation. I'm always happy to hear about that. But the main thing for me, as I've told you this before, it's my chance to interact with some of you on a more personal level. A lot of times we see each other in Athens, or we see each other at one of these live events that we've been able to do. And it's kind of a quick thing where we're all kind of in a hurry. We're kind of moving. The DawgNation Cruise is sort of like our version of summer camp where we're all just kind of hanging out. We're just having a good time. We're relaxed. We're far removed from the season. It's just a great time to kind of let our hair down and just relax. We need those vacations in our life. We need those fun things in our life. And really no better experience for me than being on Independence of the Seas, enjoying the beautiful waters of the Caribbean, going to Nassau, going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay, the private island right there in the Bahamas, enjoying the great onboard amenities for Independence of the Seas. It's such a great experience, and we want you to be with us for it. So if you'll check out our friend Jessica Slater, she's put up a website for us, royaldogs.com, and you can click the website and you can find out more about the DawgNation Cruise. And you can call Jessica. She's a real person. She's a travel agent specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to do a great job booking this cruise for us, and she's already booked so many of these staterooms. Her number is 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She'll do a great job for you. I love Jessica. She's a great travel agent. She's really an expert because she's in the Caribbean all the time. She's on Royal Caribbean cruise ships all the time, so she knows all the secrets. And by the way, you can still get, I understand, they've kind of extended that deal for $100 worth of onboard credit, so you can actually still get that, I believe, which is a really cool thing to take advantage of when you're on board for your bar bill, which, goodness knows, DawgNation has a tendency to ring up, and all the other stuff you got going on. You can do that with that onboard credit from our friends at Royal Caribbean, too, so check all of that out today. All right, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and hard not to deny the hype is building for Tennessee, Alabama, and I'll be honest with you. I don't think this game's going to be particularly close. I think this is a good chance for you to zag when everybody else is zigging. Everybody right now kind of on the side of Tennessee. It's for the most part a one-way street. I believe that Tennessee wins. I should say I believe that Alabama wins this game, whether Bryce Young plays or not. If Young plays, I don't believe it's going to be particularly close. But that doesn't change the fact that for the third Saturday in October rivalry, it has been a while since it has felt as big as it's going to feel on Saturday. You had to go back to 2016 that both these teams ranked the top 10. That's the last top 10 matchup of any kind for Tennessee. And so even though I don't think that Tennessee plays at this level right now, Alabama and Georgia are among the national elite teams. Tennessee's not for me in that category. They're good. They may go 10-2. But this is not a playoff contender. This is not a contender to even win the East. This is not an SEC championship contender. This is not that level of team. They're a 10-2 style team right now, which is not anything to be ashamed of. But even if that's what I believe about Tennessee, even someone like me who's obviously not a Vol or Bama fan, if anything the opposite, and someone who's not exactly expecting this game to be as close as maybe some think it's going to be, I can't help but be a little bit excited for it. This is, up to this point, clearly the game of the year in the SEC. I was talking to our buddy Connor Riley, who's producing today. I was asking him this weekend, you have to pick the Bama A&M game to be the CBS primetime game well in advance, way before the season begins. That's when they select that game to be their night game. But if you had a chance to do that all over again and truly select, up to this point, what is the game of the year in the SEC, obviously Alabama-Tennessee would be that. Now, if Tennessee were to win this game, let your mind kind of wander here for a moment. That would set up Georgia, Tennessee, and Athens. And some of y'all are older than me. You have better memories than me. That's the biggest home game in Athens since, we talked about this some yesterday. That's the biggest home game in Athens since how long? Ever? Connor says 2013 LSU, but Georgia had already lost by then, though, right? Yeah, so, I mean, you also have 2004 when LSU came in as the defending national champions, but I believe LSU had lost the prior week to that there as well. I mean, you've got games, I think, that come close, but if Tennessee were to win this game, this is a top 3 matchup, potentially. This is both of these teams potentially ranked in the top 3. And, I mean, obviously you can go back to early 80s, some of the Clemson games, I guess, George Rogers, coming in here, back when he did, but you'd have few examples of a game this size in Athens if Tennessee were to win. Now, I think it's all a moot point because I don't think they're going to, but it is pretty interesting to consider, what could be set up for if Tennessee were to go out there and pull that upset against Alabama there on Saturday. Another game that's not anywhere near as big, but I think it's also very interesting, is LSU and Florida on Saturday. And look, we've kind of been on the LSU scent here for a while. We liked Tennessee a lot last week simply because we don't think LSU is very good. And they've been kind of giving you some clues of that. They had like one good quarter against Mississippi State. And other than that, they played pretty lousy for almost the entirety of the season. But it sets up on Saturday as a very much a must-win game sort of for both sides here. But LSU sort of shown you what they are already. Do you find it interesting the way that I do? How little Florida has even been a factor this season at all. This is not me being a Gator hater. I'm being like as objective as I can be. We saw Florida get the upset win against Utah to begin the season. They fought a little harder than the experts thought they might against Tennessee. They lost to Kentucky, but they haven't really been a part of the college football chatter whatsoever. Well, after Saturday, one way or another, that sort of changes. They either get the win against LSU that makes the cocktail party feel a little bit bigger, or they lose a game in which Billy Napier really needs to sort of plant any kind of flag in his first year. Because here's what I'm going to tell you for Florida. On the other side of LSU, it starts to get a little bit more difficult. Obviously, Georgia's a game that no one would expect them to win. I would say Texas. They have to go to Texas A&M later on this year, and you can say what you want about A&M. That's a road game that for a first-year coach and Billy Napier will be very, very tough. Just hear me now, believe me later. Going to Texas A&M for Florida late in the season is going to be really, really tough. So there are more losses coming for Florida before the year is done. I think this LSU game looms very, very big. And if Napier wants to give his fans anything of note here in his first season, this LSU game sort of feels like one he needs to get. So I'm not saying it's a referendum on Billy Napier necessarily, but it is a very important game in terms of his overall quality of life in his first year as Florida coach. LSU Florida on Saturday is probably a little bit more interesting than you might think. And then finally, there's this. With Ole Miss and Auburn getting ready to play on Saturday, I think you're left to conclude, is this going to end up being Brian Harson's last game as Auburn coach? And one thing I want you to keep in mind of here on this. We have seen a lot of coaching firings early on this season. I believe that Harson's going to be fired in season for Auburn. I believe that could happen as soon as really this upcoming weekend. You can kind of see Auburn sort of circling the wagons here right now. I don't believe their players are speaking to the media this week. It's kind of a for instance on that. You can sort of see the wagons being circled there on the Auburn program. But here's the one thing I want you to keep in mind, that there is an obvious reason why Wisconsin moves off of their coach, why Nebraska moves off of its coach, why Tech moves off of its coach. That the early signing period, the beginning of the next football cycle, happens so early now in December that if you're firing your coach late, you are just cutting your program off at the knees getting ready for that. So the early firings are kind of a foreshadowing of some early hirings there too, that teams are trying to make their move quickly. For instance, what's his name? Clay Helton was hired as Georgia Southern coach like early November last year. So not only did we see some firings, we saw coaches starting to get hired very early too. So if you're Auburn and you're making the move, even if the boosters sort of have their handpicked guy in mind, next here, whether it be Kevin Steele or Hugh Freeze or whoever it is, you don't want to get too far behind the cycle in doing this. So if you're Auburn, you want to make the move against Harsin, doing it soon, because some of these programs that have fired coaches may very soon start hiring coaches, and all of a sudden you're trying to keep up with whether it be established SEC programs or rebooting programs who are getting the jump on you. Just keep that in mind here, that the entirety of the football cycle now spends so much quicker than it used to, and the presence of the early signing period is one of the big reasons why on that, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, when you think about big SEC action, we, of course, make our picks for that each and every Friday around here on a show we call Go With The Flow. You can see it on Friday nights on the DawgNation video channels. And on Wednesday, courtesy of our friends at MyBookie, we also give you a preview of the games we're going to be picking. These are essentially the biggest games of the weekend. Obviously, the big SEC games. We'll kind of reach and grab some of the big games nationally there, too. So let me give you a little bit of an early preview from a point spread standpoint and some early thoughts on these games there, too. Vanderbilt at Georgia. Georgia's a 38-point favorite. Georgia has not been good at home when it comes to these kinds of spreads. So if you want to take Georgia minus that big of a number, you better have a good reason for doing so. Last week got the cover against Auburn, but that's almost a touchdown's worth of difference in a spread like that. And so just keep in mind here, the closer the number gets to about 40 at home for Georgia, the more difficulty, like a lot of teams have, the more difficulty Georgia has covering such a big number. So shop carefully when it comes to Georgia minus a number like 38. Tennessee's a 7-point home underdog against Alabama. Obviously, the huge factor here is whether or not Bryce Young is playing in this game. I think the suspicion is that he probably will. So factor that into your discussion. Obviously, quarterback injuries are a big part of the story, both last week with KJ Jefferson being out, this week too. So operate right now around the assumption that Young is playing and then adjust accordingly if not. Same thing here for Mississippi State at Kentucky. You see the Bulldogs about a touchdown favorite, 6.5-point favorite on the road at Kentucky. Obviously, Levis didn't play last week, and Kentucky was not the same team without him. I don't think that Will Levis is very good, but he's clearly better than the Wildcats' backup is. So this is another one of those games that how you feel about 6.5 here is going to be greatly related to the status of Levis. And I think these two spreads right now would have you believe that, my bookie thinks Young is playing. Maybe they think that Levis is not. But be very careful with these games where quarterback injuries are a factor here right now, and a couple in the SEC where that's true. I was actually really surprised at Michigan as a 6.5-point favorite against Penn State outside the SEC in the Big Ten right now. I think that Penn State's actually has the look of a pretty good team. I don't think that Michigan's really been tested at all. My initial suspicion is that Penn State goes on the road on Saturday and gets a big win there against Michigan. Maybe I'll end up finding some reason that my initial suspicion is wrong here, but I think a lot of this is setting up for October 29th being a huge game as Penn State hosts Ohio State. And as I said, maybe I'm wrong about that, but my initial thought here is that the wrong team is favored in Penn State versus Michigan, but we'll see how that eventually plays out. And then finally, we always pick 5 games on Go With The Flow, and there was some internal debate with me about what our 5th game should be, ultimately taking Oklahoma State as TCU in this spot here, as opposed to, like, say, USC, Utah, or, some of the other games we could have picked in this instance. There's a ranked game in the ACC this week, but honestly, I'm kind of bored by that. Oklahoma State's been pretty good under Mike Gundy. You saw TCU get another win against Kansas on Saturday after the blowout win against Oklahoma prior to that. And back there in Fort Worth on Saturday at Amon G. Carter Stadium, hosting Oklahoma State as a 4-point favorite are the Horned Frogs. Those are our MyBookie best bets here for this week. We'll have more thoughts for you there on Friday. Early lean for me. Don't feel great about Georgia minus 38. Do like Bama against Tennessee. The one thing to keep in mind with Mississippi State is they have played a lot of backup quarterbacks this year. They may play one again on Saturday. So just sort of factor that in because, by the way, Georgia plays Mississippi State later on this year. And some of the perception around the Bulldogs right now is a win that without K.J. Jefferson, a Texas A&M team without Max Johnson, maybe a Kentucky without Will Levis. They've played a lot of backup quarterbacks here thus far this year. So just sort of keep that in mind as you're making your evaluation there of that game. And by the way, if you know more about picking games than I do, and you probably do, go ahead and show how much you know by opening up that brand new account with our friends at MyBookie. When you do, you're going to get a great benefit just for doing that. When you open up your initial deposit, MyBookie is going to give you a deposit bonus on top of that. That means you put in $200, they'll put in $200. You got like $400 in your account right to begin with. They'll do this all the way up to $1,000. That means you're essentially a winner before you even win your first bet. That's how MyBookie operates for you, taking good care of you. After that, it's simple. You play, you win, you get paid. It's winning season there at MyBookie. You can bet on just about anything, anywhere, anytime. Saturday action, Sunday action, baseball playoffs, everything throughout the week. Our friends at MyBookie have it. So find MyBookie online and then use the promo code DawgNation to take advantage of the big sign-up bonus. So literally, let the internet do the work for you. Just type in MyBookie in your browser. Boom, you'll go right to it. When you get there, use the promo code DawgNation. That's all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG. And then you can get the big deposit bonus. And then after that, you're on your way to winning season with our friends at MyBookie. And by the way, while I have your attention, let me also remind you that coming up on Friday here on our show, we'll do our big finish presented by the Finish Long Drink. A lot of you are always really cool to share with me all the fun things you're doing with the Finish Long Drink. Some of you doing this, obviously, tailgate season or hanging out, enjoying some patio time. Fall weather's so beautiful here around our state this time of year. So whatever you're doing to Finish Long Drink, we want to see that with you coming up on Friday. So make sure you send that to us. And by the way, if you've never tried the Finish Long Drink, this is a great time to be able to try that there as well. If you go to thelongdrink.com, you can put in your zip code and find out where you can pick some up. Golf courses, bars, restaurants, beverage stores, so many great places to pick that up with, whether it's the Long Drink Cranberry or the Long Drink Strong, which is 8.5% by alcohol by volume, Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar, Long Drink Traditional, which comes in a blue can, has the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, all kinds of really fun ways to enjoy the Finish Long Drink, and I hope that you will enjoy that today. And take a picture of yourself doing that, send it to us, and we'll feature you on Friday as a part of our Big Finish presented by the Finish Long Drink. All right, so as we get ready to wrap up here today, I had a kind of a funny exchange with somebody online yesterday, and I want to make this the subject of our Golden Shoe today. Of course, the Braves in the playoffs yesterday, and they lost Game 1 against the Phillies. We'll wish the Braves well here in Game 2 this afternoon, kind of getting back going there at Truist Park. And the phrase the Braves are kind of going with right now is sort of like back to battle, obviously after winning the World Series a year ago. And Kent Oliver said with me, hey, I like that slogan. I think back to bark also has a nice ring to it, don't you think? And he asked that to me, and I said, I sure do. And I also like hashtag go for 2 and 22, which is obviously what we've been kind of pushing around here. And he says he loves that one. He says maybe you can make that a T-shirt with our friends at 76 Apparel or something like that. And I said, listen, you never quite know what might be coming down the pike on that, because we are big believers that hashtag go for 2 and 22 is in full effect. And so, Kent, I appreciate you sharing that and being a part of our conversation here today. By the way, lousy, stinking Gators, they're not going for anything right now. All they're going for is more misery. It's been 5,025 days since they have won a national championship. And Georgia back in Jacksonville again. Cocktail party ready to get going. 17 days from right now. Georgia beating up on Florida again. You know Eddie the Blind Squirrel loves that. And you know we love it too. We'll see you tomorrow back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. It's getting cold. At least at night it is. And pretty soon it's going to be cold forever, or at least all throughout the day. And so when you start thinking about that, get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. All right, we're not going to go crazy long today because we got like 85 things to do. But we will get your comments, and we will let you take this portion of the show with you wherever you want it to. So I'm going to go to YouTube first, because I did not do that yesterday, and let the YouTube folks give their feelings, let it be known here. And Jeremy Little says the Falcons need to stop roughing the passer. I mean, if anything, they need to stop being part of games that Jerome Boger's the referee for. I saw some of the numbers for him. He's a disaster. He is an absolute disaster as a referee. He is the NFL version of what, like, say, Angel Hernandez, some of these C.B. Buckner, some of these Major League Baseball umpires that you become way too acquainted with. Boger is the NFL example of that. Paul Moon says, Anthony Richardson looking good against Tennessee's defense is all I need to know to feel good about that game. If they make him look good, our offense should torch them. Yeah, I mean, I spent some time on this yesterday. I think that Tennessee and Mississippi State, teams like that, are different enough offensively that you have to account for it. And a coach like Kirby Smart is attracted to that. He wants to game plan there on that. But in totality, there are a lot of things about the Tennessee program that don't kind of rise to the elite status. It just doesn't. I think that when you can do one thing really, really well, and Tennessee does throw it really well, it makes you dangerous. When you have an elite function, that can make you dangerous as a team. And so Tennessee's a tough out because it does throw it so well. But ultimately, these are 60-minute games. And you saw this last Saturday, or I should say last year in November. Georgia took a haymaker from Tennessee early, but leaned on it for the full 60. When the game was done, it just wasn't close. And I don't know that Alabama beats Tennessee that bad this year, because frankly I don't believe this Alabama team is nearly as good as Georgia was a year ago. But over the course of the full 60, the stuff that you're not good at just sort of shows up over time. I'm always amazed with those of you that play blackjack. Theoretically, the house advantage in blackjack is only 1/2 of 1%. If you're a good basic strategy player, you're only giving the house about a 0.5% edge. And yet, over the course of time, if you sit at that table long enough, you'll lose every dollar you have. That's all it takes. 0.5% edge for the house would drain you dry, bleed you into bankruptcy if you let it go long enough. And in football, the better team typically has a little bit more than a 0.5% edge. So the longer the game goes, the more it favors the team that has that edge. And Bama just has overall more roster strength. This is a pretty good Alabama defense. It is the best defense Alabama's had in quite some time, because they do have the pass rush element. They do. And that's something they're going to try to dial up on Saturday, I would imagine. I don't think anyone is going to. I mean, out west you still see this. Like BYU plays this kind of defense, and Arkansas plays this kind of defense. Although I'm guessing in future years they stop. I don't see Alabama dropping 7, 8 guys into coverage. I don't see anybody in a situation like this trying to defend Tennessee the way that maybe some teams tried to defend LSU back in 2019, because everybody who tried this failed. You got to get after the quarterback in a game like this. And yes, it makes you more susceptible to give up the big plays. And frankly, I don't think the Alabama secondary is anywhere near its strength right now. But you got to get after quarterback, and I believe that Alabama probably will. Frank Patterson says, how can you not have the booming onion on your freshman list? He's playing really well. You're exactly right. Also a great nickname, too. A very, very good nickname. Tennessee might win the national championship this year. Tennessee has a better chance of losing the Citrus Bowl than they do of winning the national championship. I'm just telling you right now, they're not an elite category team. They're not. Y'all, Tennessee hasn't done anything yet that they weren't expected to do. They were a favorite at LSU back in the summer. This isn't, and you don't have to bet on games to understand this. Like the perception of Tennessee was they'd beat Florida easily. They frankly kind of only, won okay. The perception they'd go on the road and win at Pitt. They needed overtime to be able to do so. The perception back in the summer was they'd go on the road and win at LSU. That's back when the folks thought LSU might be good, or at least, decent. As of yet, Tennessee hasn't done anything yet they weren't expected to do. We've been talking about Tennessee week to week, and they have done thus far everything we thought they would. Just be careful getting out in front of yourself on this. That next step is a doozy. They were better than I thought they'd be in year 1. They're even better than that thus far in year 2. But to go the next step beyond that, you better really, really have something going for you to be able to do that. Because here's what I was comparing them to. Think about Hugh Freeze in 2014. Like what Josh Heupel is trying to do right now is what Freeze did in 2014. Freeze beat Alabama at home in a year in which Alabama was good enough to win the national championship. Now, they didn't win it that year, but they made the playoff, and they were good enough to win it. They just didn't. That's what Freeze did. Is Josh Heupel at Tennessee right now in as good a situation as Freeze was in 2014? I don't think he is. Freeze had an all-time recruiting class prior to that 2014 season. That's not the kind of roster strength that Tennessee currently has right now. They don't have a bad roster, especially on offense, but it's not the same type of deal here. Nor am I quite so confident that Josh Heupel is a Hugh Freeze-level coach. I'm not. By the way, I'm sure we'll be talking more about Freeze over the course of the next few months, I'm guessing. But I'm just not convinced on any of this. Now, listen, maybe I end up being wrong. Maybe Josh Heupel is on his way to doing something, but I'm going to need to see it first. So no, I don't think that what Heupel is capable of doing on Saturday mirrors what Hugh Freeze proved capable of doing in 2014. You can go back and sort of relitigate this all you want to. Clearly they cheated to get the recruiting class, and clearly this, that, and the other. But Hugh Freeze did something back in 2014 and 2015 in the SEC that was not easy to do. He made it look easier than it actually is. And I think that Josh Heupel, in trying to build a similar type program at Tennessee, I think he might serve as a reminder that it's just not that easy. Not that easy to take that next step. Noah Sheldon says Freeze is way better than Heupel. I suspect that's probably true. Alex Waller says, what about Matt Rule, the former Baylor and Carolina Panthers coach, to Auburn? I don't think that Rule would be a good fit for the SEC. I think that Rule is a good coach, but I don't think he's a good fit for the SEC. And this is one of those things where I just sort of have a little bit of a feel to it. In fact, I'll give you a scorching take here for a moment. I don't believe that Matt Rule would be any better in the SEC than Brian Harsin is. I don't think that Rule. I don't think that Rule is cut out for the SEC. I think that he's a better fit at a place like Waco, Texas. I think he could be an okay fit at a place like Lincoln, Nebraska. Arizona State maybe. But it takes a special kind of guy to come in here in the SEC, and I don't get the impression that that's what Rule is. You got to really – the next coach at Auburn has to understand SEC recruiting. You've got to understand SEC recruiting. And you got to have some, fire-breathing dragons on your staff. It's one of the reasons why I believe that Auburn will probably make a big push at Del McGee on its next staff, because you have to have guys that understand the area. Brian Harsin, his coaching obituary is going to say that he didn't understand the SEC. He alienated the coaches on his staff that did understand the SEC. See Mike Bobo on that. And when the going got tough, he surrounded himself with people from like Boise, and that's just not a fit down here in this league. And so, Rule may be a better coach than Harsin, maybe, because honestly, I think that Brian Harsin will go back out west, some Group of 5 job, and he'll probably start doing well again. I think part of the Brian Harsin story is that the Mountain West and the Group of 5, kind of west of the Colorado River, is not a very good, proving ground. It's not a very good springboard to success in a league like the SEC. It's just not. So Harsin can coach next year if he wants to, closer to home and a little bit more, familiar territory. And I'm sure he'll probably start doing well again. And if Rule was the coach at Auburn next year, my overall outlook for him wouldn't be much better than my outlook for Harsin would be. Good coach to bad fit. And some of this is just sort of vibe to me. And I know this sounds weird. But like, I remember seeing Rule before the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. And, like when Kirby Smart walks with the team into the stadium, Smart wears a suit. And I always thought it was weird that like football coaches wear a suit to the stadium and then change into like athletic gear, whereas basketball coaches used to show up at the gym in athletic gear and they would change into a suit. I always thought it was interesting they did the opposite. But Smart kind of walks into the stadium, he's always wearing a suit, showing up for business. Whereas like Matt Rule like came to the stadium wearing like sweat clothes. And I'm not saying that makes him a worse coach. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that's not what the SEC is. The SEC is not coaching sweat gear before a game. It's just not. Good, bad, whatever. I'm not saying it even matters. I'm saying there is a certain look that SEC coaches have, and Matt Rule does not have that look. He is a good coach. He needs to stay far away from the SEC, though. It's just not a good fit for him, I don't believe. Let's see what else. Alan Hampton says, has the SEC East taken over or getting close to taking over as the strongest side over the SEC West? Your thoughts? I thought it might be, but, Kentucky had a chance to go on the road when Ole Miss and didn't. Mississippi State's a touchdown favorite at Kentucky right now. As I told you before, I think that Florida's going to probably lose to Texas A&M later on this year. Florida LSU on Saturday is a little bit of a coin flip here right now. So I don't see much evidence that the East is closing the gap with the West. I thought it might be, but is there any result this year that even says that it is even coming close to doing that? Have we seen any East team beat a West team? And will we see that, any note here this year? Missouri couldn't beat Auburn, for instance. It's an example of like sort of kind of cross comparison here. You don't really see much of an example of that. I thought the door was open to close the gap with the West, but I don't really see any example that it has happened. In fact, I think I see some examples coming up in the future where it kind of doesn't. G. Greg's Bama Boy says if Bryce Young doesn't play, we won't be able to exploit Tennessee garbage secondary. So G. Greg's kind of weighing in on that. Cousin Eddie says that Georgia gains an edge over Tennessee and Bama by having them face each other before we play either one. Could be interesting. I do think it's worth watching the game to see how each side attacks the other as a way of kind of thinking about what Georgia might want to do there in that same spot. I think that's fair. I think that's fair to say. Let me go over to Facebook here for a moment. On Facebook. Let's see what's going on here. Alan Verbanchik says Mississippi State's the hardest game on the schedule. I've sort of always thought that was true. I haven't really seen anything that changes my feeling on that. Tougher for Georgia than Tennessee is. It's a road game. Mississippi State's pretty good. As I mentioned before, let's be careful about falling all over ourselves about Mississippi State because it is a lot of backup quarterbacks they faced thus far this year. But still. Kent Holcomb says the Bears are back last night. 3 a.m. to our outdoor kitchen. But this time I got up and my dog named so there you go. So Kent Holcomb's taking care of business with his bears. I've never encountered a bear in nature But boy, I got to tell you, that'd be quite a thing to be able to see. That'd be quite a thing to be able to see. Eric Dvornsey says, I think the West is still better. Yeah, for now, I think that's probably true. There's two. Julian Harris checks in to say, anybody happy to know that defense always travels well and our young players are only going to get better as the season goes along? Yeah, I thought all things being equal, Georgia had its best defensive day of the season thus far on Saturday, and it makes me eager to see more of what's on its way. It does. I think you're right about that. Roxanne Smith says, is there any real scenario where Saban doesn't start Bryce Young this weekend? I mean, I think the one thing to consider is that Bryce Young is probably getting an independent analysis on his shoulder, and I don't know that Saban's going to have the ability to kind of influence Young's decision the way that maybe he might would have had in the past. But I'm assuming that Bryce Young's also a competitor, and if he is healthy enough, I'm assuming he wants to play. I think the perception is right now that Young will play, and I'm sort of going to operate on that assumption until it happens. But I think it's a fair question. Sean Shannon checks in and said, come to Alaska, BA. I'll show you some bears. Sean, I can only imagine, and it's cool that you're checking in from Alaska, but I can only imagine what kind of – I mean, I've never been to Alaska. I just want to go because, I am sort of fascinated by – you see more bald eagles, you see the bears, you see, obviously all kinds of stuff. The big elk. You see all that. I'd love to see all that. I'd love to see all that. Sean, that's really cool. Scott Gentry says the Cowboys at Mississippi State drive you crazy. Yeah, I've never been to a game there in Starkville, but I am already preparing my earplugs for that, no question. Nick Roundtree says, I feel like this team goes on a run after the bye once we get our guys healthy, similar to 2007, on our way to another end zone dance at SoFi Stadium. Boy, I like that. That's fun to think about. Yeah, I mean, my overall confidence level in Georgia is sort of the same as it always was. Is there a chance this team is better than the 2021 team? I still think there is. Is there a chance this team's going to repeat as national champions? I think that it is. Can I guarantee either one of those things being true? I can't. But for me, perfection isn't, nor has it ever been, the standard. Imperfection doesn't scare me off of Georgia because I see imperfections every week when I watch Alabama, and I'm assuming we're going to start seeing more of those imperfections when we watch Ohio State too. Ohio State didn't play a good game against a bad Notre Dame team, and we may see more examples of that. That what this is right now is a fair fight. Georgia is in it. Alabama is in it. Ohio State is in it. I sort of suspect that Clemson is in it. I think that Penn State's probably in it. Is anybody else in it? I don't know. But right now it's a fair fight. And in a fair fight, you just sort of throw it out there and you sort of see how it all ends up. But Georgia is in the midst of a very formidable defense of its national championship. And the best could be yet to come. I agree. I do. Joseph Kennedy says, I'm going to get myself an English bulldog and name it Brock Kennedy. I like that, Joseph. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. It's not easy to get English bulldogs, right? I mean, I don't know a ton about dogs. I'm not a huge dog person, but it's not easy to get them, right? Randy Hall says, my prediction is this freshman class will win a national championship before they finish their careers. I mean, when you think about the next, 3 years of Georgia football, it's crazy to think what this defense could be. Like, one of my hottest takes is that the 2021 defense will eventually not be the best defense for Kirby Smart at Georgia. And I think when you see the young talent that's currently at UGA, it's sort of easy to see the path where that could be true. Daniel Aldrich also had a bear in his backyard there as well. Randy Hall, high school this weekend. We got Cambridge going to Kell. So Cambridge going to Kell on Friday night. And then next week, got a really fun game. It's our Hall of Fame game. You're going to be talking more about this. Our high school football Hall of Fame inaugural induction ceremony is next Saturday night, the bye week Saturday night, there at the College Football Hall of Fame. And we got Grayson and Brookwood next Friday. So 2 really fun games over the course of the next couple of weeks for us. Alan Verbanchik also says, we see a bear in the wild at every UGA game. A great shout-out for Bear Alexander. That's really good. Miriam Corbin says she's taking her headphones with her to Mississippi State. I like that. Barry Watkins says, what concerns me is the recruits we could lose if Dell McGee leaves. Totally get that. Dell's a great recruiter. And as many of you are aware, not just a formidable running back recruiter, but he's also a huge factor in, a lot of that guys from those, a guy like Mikael Williams being the Georgia roster, and Dell McGee's a big factor there. McGee's been a big factor in a lot of players that are not just running backs. He's a very valuable commodity. I'd be very surprised if Auburn doesn't make a very big push at him with their next coach. I'm not saying that McGee will leave. That's not what I'm saying at all. I wouldn't pretend to know. But if Auburn's next coaching staff doesn't include a very big push at a guy that graduated from there, then you're sort of left to wonder, what are y'all even doing? So yeah, that's just it's more just an observation than anything. Eric DeVorncy says, wish you could make it down to Middle Georgia for a game. Well, we did a game at Robbins last year. We did Warner Robbins, Lee County last year. And I loved it. I mean, there was a huge crowd there that day at the MAC for that game. Huge crowd. So much fun. So I like it. Like, here's the thing. I'm willing to go anywhere. My partner, Rusty Manziel, he's willing to go anywhere. We went down to Thomasville last year for a playoff game. So he and I actually really like going Middle Georgia, going down to Southwest Georgia. We really like that. I'd go to Lowndes. I'd go anywhere. I love doing that. The issue you run into, and I'm just being completely honest with you, is it takes a very big crew to put a game like this together. Traveling the crew outside the Atlanta area does get a little tricky. So we'll do it some, but we can't probably do it as much as we want to because that's just logistically a very hard thing to do. When you're talking about trucks and all the stuff that it takes to put a TV broadcast together, you're moving a lot of people in a situation like that. So all it was Rusty and me. Trust me when I tell you, we'd go to Moultrie, we'd go to Thomasville, we'd go to Lowndes, we'd go to Coffee, we'd go everywhere. We'd go everywhere. But when you got a big crew, we don't get to go to like Warner Robbins and Peach County and places like that. It's probably as much as we'd like to. Octavius Oliver said no Valdosta games this year. All right. Let's see what else. Doug Raymond asked about the Carrollton quarterback. I thought he was as advertised. I really did. And like nobody wants to be like, crazy hype when it comes to this, but I was very curious to see because I've not really seen a lot of really good freshman quarterbacks. Like I know what a really good junior quarterback looks like, and I know what a really good senior quarterback looks like, and I've probably seen some sophomores too. I really haven't seen that many freshman quarterbacks starting in like 7A. Carrollton's ranked number 4 in the state. This is a really good team. So I was just kind of curious, what does a player like this look like as a freshman? And I mean, I'd put Lewis up with almost any quarterback we've seen on TV thus far this year. And I'm telling you right now that I didn't see anything from him that would make me think that he's not going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as a prospect and a recruit. And I'm not trying to do like the big hype thing. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just telling you, I was looking for like disqualifiers or a reason why it's not quite, what it's supposed to be. I thought he was very good, very good. He just recently visited Texas. He was wearing like the Texas towel, in his uniform on Friday night. I don't think he's necessarily going to Texas. He just gotten back from Texas. So I saw a guy that I feel quite confident saying is going to be, one of the bigger stars in Georgia over the course of the next couple of years. I thought he was really good. And obviously Joey King is a great quarterbacks coach, former, coach, obviously, of Trevor Lawrence there at Cartersville and a guy that just sort of knows this really well. And so I think that Lewis is in a good spot being there at Carrollton, working with King as coach. And so I thought he was really good. I thought the East Coweta quarterback was good too. He's a sophomore, but I thought that Julian Lewis was very good. Let's see what else. Hugh Nash says, when it comes to high school football, just my own traveling posse with my hair, my makeup, my wardrobe, the best boy, the key grip, and everything like that. That's pretty funny, Hugh. Pretty funny. All right, final comments. We're ready to go. DawgNation.com and then everything else. Brandon Griffin says the iPhone 14 is like a film studio in your pocket. Might help when you travel. Yeah, there you go. Maybe in future years we'll just do the whole thing on an iPhone. Maybe that's the case. JP says Florida only lost Tennessee by 5. Let me read this. He says, Florida only lost Tennessee by 5 points on the road. If anyone is that concerned with Tennessee, then Florida's performance against them should have everyone's attention. Yeah, for me, it kind of comes down to the whole idea of too much too soon. Big win last week against LSU. That was an impressive performance for Tennessee. But the Florida game, being a double-digit favorite there in that spot at home, we said going into that, that's too much too soon. The result proved we were right. I think Alabama is also another example of just kind of too much too soon for Tennessee, and I'm fairly confident we're going to be right about that too. Johnny Surfdog says, as a Jacksonville native, I remain focused on those lousy, stinking Gators 365 days a year. Beat Florida. Johnny Surfdog, I like to hear that. By the way, if you're focused on those lousy, stinking Gators, boy, do I have the right shirt for you. How about the Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt, which you can find at the DawgNation store? If you go to the top of the page, DawgNation.com, click that link, you can get this today and show everybody there in Gainesville, or I should say in Jacksonville where you live, just how lousy and stinking those lousy and stinking Gators are. You can get one of these today online at DawgNation.com. Let's see. What else? Charles Womack says, is there a good fit for Auburn as long as the boosters do the hiring and firing? Yeah. I mean, you got to be somebody that's okay with that. I think the guy they wanted the last time around was Kevin Steele. I don't know how easy it is to hire Steele right now, given the fact it's been an awful year for Miami. That's where he's defensive coordinator right now. The biggest possible hire is Hugh Freeze. That would be a good hire. If you hire Hugh Freeze, I believe that Auburn would be very good again probably pretty soon. I think Hugh Freeze is a good coach. He would make Auburn much more dangerous than they have been. I think that'd probably be – now, can you Freeze brings a lot of baggage, things like that. I'm not really commenting on that one way or another. I just think he's a good football coach. So that would probably be their home run swing if they had a chance to do it. Diedrich Frederick says that Freeze would certainly give Saban fits. Yeah, he's beaten him twice head-to-head. So if you're an Auburn program, you want to be competitive with Saban as long as he's there. Freeze has already shown you his ability to be able to do that. Let's see what else. DT says the excitement leading up to that game between George Rogers and Herschel Walker was amazing. Yeah, I've heard stories about it. I really have. I've definitely heard stories about it. Johnny Surfdog says, I'm buying several of those shirts right now. Johnny, that's awesome. Hope you wear them with pride. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Final comments here on YouTube, and then we're gone for today. James K. says he missed me at the Walton North Paulding game. Yeah, that was one of those things, James, where it was a great game, and I hated not being there. So that was the one high school game I knew I was going to have to miss because of the Missouri travel. We knew we were going to be going to Columbia. Then, lo and behold, the weather moved the game up. But at that point in time, the wheels were already in motion for me not to do the high school game. So I kind of had to step aside, although I would love to have been there. But it's just one of those things that once the wheels get in motion, it's sort of like there's no changing that procedure there at that point in time. But I hate that I missed such a good game because it was a wild game. Jonathan Aaron says, I know Beck will get a lot of playing time Saturday. Should he start and give Bennett a rest so we can have 2 weeks to get feeling better and ripe for the next few games? Yeah, like the one thing that I think sometimes some people want Georgia to do in games like this, they're just not going to do. Like they're just not going to treat the game like G-Day. They're not. That I think if you want guys to be healthy as they possibly can be, I think you actually go out there and try to do on Saturday what you're supposed to do, which is build a lead, get the easy win. That means playing your starters at the beginning of the game. And if you get a chance to play some backups, then do that. But like when you start messing around with, we're going to start tinkering and trying this, or we're going to, substitute more liberally early in the game than we normally would, that's a recipe for potentially making a game closer than it should be. So, maybe Bennett's a little banged up with his shoulder. Maybe he's not. I suspect he's probably not 100% because, as Jake Fromm told us yesterday, nobody's really 100%. So I'm sure that Stetson Bennett's no different. But Georgia wants to make the game against Vanderbilt as easy as it can make it because that's how you keep guys healthy. You build the lead, you take care of business, and then you coast after that. And so I would assume that's going to mean playing starting players, at the beginning of the game. DMart42 says if Petrino was 20 years younger, he'd be at top of Auburn's list. Yeah, a lot of us remember when Petrino was the top of their list and the drama that created for sure. Foster Moss also pointing out Buford Mill Creek is going to be a great game. I think that obviously everybody knows how good Buford is. I think that Mill Creek is very, very tough in this spot on Friday. I would definitely keep my eye on. Mill Creek. Definitely keep my eye on Mill Creek here on that. Jay Shipe says, is Kirby Smart scared to have another quarterback light up the scoreboard and avoid controversy? I can promise you that's not a consideration in their mind whatsoever. That is not a consideration in their mind whatsoever. Not in the least. Not in the least. Listen, Carson Beck may have a very bright future. He may go on to be Georgia's quarterback next year. I can promise you this. The idea of Beck playing and outperforming Stetson Bennett is an idea that exists only on the fringes of the internet. I'm just telling you right now. That's just that. Let us see what else. John Adams says, I've got 2 English Bulldogs, a big dollar one, and the third time unlucky for free. Oh, wow. Third time unlucky became the most expensive troublemaker. They are awesome fun. Well, John, I'm glad to hear you're having fun with all that. Rodney Baxter calling his shot, Dogs covering on Saturday. So that's a good bit of confidence there. You love to hear that. Chris Anderson says, I hear about the Marietta program a lot. 2 of my cousins graduated from there, and my uncle's a bit of a legend there. Marietta is one of the best game day environments that we go to. It's a gorgeous stadium, beautiful locale. It's kind of nestled right there into like a neighborhood very close to downtown Marietta. They have an unbelievable tailgating scene. Like they have a true like college football style tailgating scene there before a game. There are a lot of places we go that are fabulous. Obviously, we were just at Carrollton. That's probably the best facility in the entire state. But the Marietta, I'm very partial to that Marietta pregame scene. It's probably one of the very best. All right, we got to get ready to go. Good stuff, y'all. Thanks for being here. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They will do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can check them out today. Water heater, if it goes out, in many cases, RS Andrews can replace it for you the same day. You know, right now we're in the midst of my son's baseball season, and I don't know if y'all do this, but with your own kids, but the infield dirt on these baseball fields is so dirty. I know it sounds crazy. It's the dirtiest dirt you'll ever see in your life. And when I come home, I just feel filthy. I just feel so filthy. I love that hot shower to get washed off and cleaned off. I just love the feeling of that hot shower at night, getting all this grime and dirt from the baseball field off of me. And I'm always thinking, gosh, if this water heater wasn't working right now, it wouldn't be miserable. Well, if you're ever worried about yours going out, or if it does go out, our friends at RS Andrews can replace it for you in many cases the same day. So find them online at rsandrews.com for more on that. Also, check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. Obviously, all eyes right now on 4:35 this afternoon. Game 2 for the Braves against the Phillies. We're watching that very closely and getting ready for that, and also other things around the city of Atlanta there, too. Plenty of Braves coverage online, ajc.com, and also getting close on the election, things like that. You can follow all that stuff there. And if you want to read up about Brent Key, the interim coach at Georgia Tech, who's actually done a pretty good job, you can kind of follow that story there online, too, at ajc.com. And, by the way, speaking of the Athens area, how about the B-52s, one of the legendary music groups from Athens? They've got I guess, kind of a farewell concert coming up in Athens. That's kind of a cool thing to think about. You can get more of that online, ajc.com there as well. Thanks for being here today for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And we will see all of you back here again tomorrow.